This tutorial podcast is sponsored by the Creative Cow Master Series of training DVDs, professional training and tools from actual multimedia professionals. Yeah, we thought it was a good idea too. Check out our growing number of titles at www.creativecowtraining.net. Hey, this is Aaron Rabinowitz for CreativeCow.net. I'm feeling good. You know why? Because this is the third part of our tutorial on expression controls, and that means that this is a trilogy. That's right, baby. You're watching the Creative Cow trilogy on expression controls. Too much, maybe? I don't know. Okay, anyway. In parts 1 and 2 of this tutorial, we talked about expression control effects and how they can be used to get control of animation and effects by adding external controls. We covered 5 out of the 6 expression control effects, so we have one more to go. Our last expression control is the slider control. You may have already encountered it but not realized it. For example, if I were to select some audio and use the keyframe assistant called Convert Audio to Keyframes, After Effects creates a new layer in which it adds 3 sliders, a left channel slider, a right channel slider, and a mixed channel audio slider called both channels. Now, these sliders can be linked to properties of other layers such as the scale property to make a layer scale up or down based on the audio. You can learn more about this keyframe assistant by watching my tutorial on creating a custom audio waveform. Now that's a 2-part tutorial, so not a trilogy. Okay then. The point is that After Effects generated numerical values for the audio and added them to a slider. Then we linked those values to a different layer's properties. In that situation, we didn't really have control over the values created in that slider, but in truth, we can create our own sliders and use them more precisely for what we need. Let's take a look at a situation where we can use a slider to get some control over an expression. If you've ever needed to generate random motion in After Effects, there are really only 2 alternatives. Use the tool called the Wiggler or a wiggle expression. Now, the Wiggler can be found under Window, the Wiggler. This tool allows you to create random motion by generating keyframes with random values in a given property. So, if we wanted to make this solid layer shake a little bit as it moves along its motion path, we could select the position keyframes and then choose the frequency of the randomness, or how often a random value will be generated, as well as the magnitude, meaning how far off the current value the numbers can deviate. So if I choose a frequency of 10 and a magnitude of 20, 10 times every second the layer will deviate up to 20 pixels off its motion path. It's important to note that you must have at least 2 keyframes for this to work. With the keyframe selected, just click Apply, and as you can see, the layer wiggles off its original path. If I were to delete all keyframes except the first and last, the layer goes back to normal. The other way to randomly generate values is to use a wiggle expression. In this case, in the solid layers position property, I've added the expression wiggle open parentheses 10, 20 close parentheses. Again, the 10 being the rate or frequency of the wiggle and the 20 being the deviation or magnitude. The results are similar to those in the previous example. However, in the last case, the wiggle was generated as random keyframe values. When I deleted those keyframes, the layer stopped wiggling. But in the wiggle expression, keyframes have nothing to do with the randomness. If I delete my position keyframes, as you can see, the layer still continues to wiggle. Randomness is not being generated by keyframes. It's being generated under the hood via the wiggle expression. Now, there are pros and cons to both solutions. For example, having keyframes generate randomness means I can tell it when to stop being random. By not having any keyframes past a certain point in time, I can effectively shut off the wiggle. Or if I don't like a particular wiggle keyframe, I can just delete it. The downside of using the Wiggler is that if you want to change the wiggle frequency or magnitude, you have to erase all of your interim keyframes and re-wiggle it. The Wiggler is destructive in that it might write over your original keyframes, changing their values, so it may even require reanimating from scratch. On the other hand, expressions are dynamic. That is, if you make a change to values in the expression, it instantly updates. So that's a really great thing. But not using keyframes can be a real liability if you only want a layer to wiggle for a short while and then stop. A simple wiggle expression cannot be controlled, and as a result, once you're wiggling for good. Or are you? Well, thanks to our last expression controller, the slider control, we can get the best of both worlds. And here's how you do it. Here I have a solid layer moving between 3 points. I want this layer to start off with no random motion and end with no random motion, but in between I want the randomness to grow and ebb. So I'll add a new null object to the composition by choosing Layer, New, Null Object. Then, with the null selected, I'll choose Effect, Expression Controls, Slider Control. As you can see in the Effects panel, a new slider control has been added to my null object. Now it's called a slider because if you twirl down the slider property, you get an actual slider that you can grab hold of and move. I'm going to select the slider control effect and duplicate it by hitting Ctrl D or Command D if you're on a Macintosh. Next, let's rename each of these effects. I'll select the first slider and hit Enter and rename it FREQ or Freak for frequency. OK. Then I'll select the second slider and rename that one MAG or MAG for magnitude. OK, good. Now the hard work, and it's really not that hard. In the timeline, select the null object and hit E to reveal all effects. Then twirl down both slider controls so you can see the property called slider. Next, select the solid layer and if it's not already visible, hit P to reveal the position property. Now Alt-click or if you're on a Macintosh, Option-click on the position property stopwatch to create an expression. Let's delete all of the text in there and set up a new expression by first defining some terms. So write the following, x equals. Then take the expression pickwhip and drag it to the slider called freak. As you can see, the expression now reads that x is defined as the value found in our frequency slider. Add a semicolon to the end of the line and then hit Enter on the keyboard, not the number pad, to go to the next line. On that next line, write y equals, and again drag the pickwhip over to the mag slider, giving us the next defined term that the letter y equals the values found in our magnitude slider. Again, add a semicolon to the end of the line. Hit Enter again to go to the next line and type the following expression. Wiggle, open parentheses, x, comma, y, close parentheses, which means wiggle the layer's position with a frequency of whatever the frequency slider says and at a magnitude of whatever the magnitude slider says. Hit Enter on the number pad to confirm the expression. Now right now, nothing's going to happen. As I scroll through time, our layer is still moving along its path because both frequency and magnitude are set to 0. But if we animate the values going up and down over the course of the animation, things will change. So at frame 0, add a keyframe for both properties with a value of 0. Then, at the 2-second mark, add a new keyframe for the frequency with a value of 15 and a new keyframe for the magnitude with a value of 50. Then, at the 4-second mark, set both properties back to 0. A quick RAM preview, and you can see that the layer starts off with no randomness, gets very random at the middle of the animation, but then settles back to normal at the end. You can use this trick to add an earthquake to a scene by shaking things up a bit for a moment and then having it stop. You can also use a slider for more complex things like making dynamic math equations. For example, you could tell a layer to rotate using its current keyframe values multiplied by x, with x being the value found in an animated slider. Anyway, if you're really interested in some practical applications of these expression controllers, check out Dan Ebert's article at Creative Cow called Building the World's Greatest Cameraman. And don't forget, you can get the files for this and other podcasts at www.creativecow.net/AE podcast. Once again, this is Aaron Rabinowitz for CreativeCow.net.